For those who don't know me, my name is Kent Nelson. I'm the Forest Ranger Specialist with the Maine Forest Service. I've been with the Forest Service for about 19 years, and I had the pleasure of working with Pequawket Lake Preservation Association for the last 10 years or so. What I'd like to do today is kind of do an overview of how the Firewise program works and talk a little bit about the history of Firewise within PLPA in Limington, and then talk about our brush chipping program and a little bit about the current status of fires in Maine. And then we'll have some time at the end to talk about some wildfire concerns in Limington and answer any questions. But if there's something that comes up, chime in. Seems like we got kind of a small group here today, so it's pretty informal. So everyone knows where Pequawket Lake is in Limington, and I've gotten pretty familiar with some of these back roads over the years doing our chipping program there. But Firewise is a program, national program that has about 1,800 Firewise USA sites throughout the United States. And it was started about 15 years ago by NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. And they have basically a couple of requirements to be part of this recognition program and this fire prevention program. First of all, you have to maintain a Firewise board, which is kind of what we have within PLPA and with these type meetings with the fire department. And you also have to have a certain amount of hazardous fuels mitigation, which is the fancy word for brush chipping days, and also a wildfire prevention and education event every year, sort of like what we're going to do here, because I'm going to go through some slides that show what people can do to reduce the risk of a home ignition from a wildfire. But I like to review kind of the how the requirements are met. And I think Mark Eastman might already be familiar with this, maybe some of the rest of you, but basically there's no money involved in being Firewise. But what they do is they want to make sure that you're having that brush chipping day and that Firewise prevention event each year. So they require you to do the equivalent of 1 volunteer hour per dwelling each year. So if you have 100 dwellings, 100 cottages, camps, homes, then you're required to do 100 volunteer hours worth of work at mitigation and prevention. And they use the national volunteer rate of $25 per hour. So that's how that works. And again, there's no money involved. It's just they want to kind of hold us to getting rid of brush, reducing that risk, and learning how we can prevent wildfires. And PLPA has done a great job with that in the past. Okay, did that change?
Yeah.
Looking at the signs. Okay. So a little bit of the history of Firewise program in PLPA. In 2010, we were contacted by the president at the time, and he had concerns about wildfires in the community. I think the fire chief was involved initially too. And in spring of 2011, we met up. We had about 4 rangers and paired up with some local fire department personnel and did 22 wildfire risk assessments, which is kind of a look at the landscaping and exterior building materials of the structures. And we also look at access and water sources, stuff like that. We also did 8 vegetation plots, and these are generally away from homes, but they kind of give us an idea of what type of trees and how fire would behave if there became a wildfire. So based on those wildfire risk assessments, which get a rating of low, moderate, high risk of wildfire, the overall average rating was moderate risk for wildfire in the community. But a lot of our Firewise communities have that same risk. I think only one was high, and it's an island. I'll go to the next slide here. In 2012, we attended the annual meeting. I think it was in June, and the district ranger there, Greg Hessline, who's since retired, he presented this Firewise plaque. It's kind of hard to see. It's clear plexiglass, but that's when PLPA became a nationally recognized Firewise community. So we don't just give these Firewise statuses out like candy. You have to go through our Wildland Urban Interface program and then be committed to maintaining that annual brush chipping day and Firewise Day. So in the past, we've done a lot of different Firewise Day events. This one was done in 2015 outside the town office. And we talked to some people that were going in there to do some town business. And I had some maps up there and posters how you can remove brush near the structures to reduce that risk. And then in 2016, we had a Firewise Day event down by the town beach and the campground. And we had a few people there. It was, I still have that truck, believe it or not. It's got over 100,000 miles on it, but it was pretty new back then. We had a small crowd, but we had a good discussion. And then this picture actually was taken in Booth Bay Harbor, but I don't have too many pictures of me doing wildfire risk assessments, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm talking to a homeowner who lives on the ocean in this case about removing brush and how softwoods are more volatile than hardwoods and want to kind of concentrate on those. But in the last few years, I've done wildfire risk assessments. Usually we do them randomly, but I've been doing them by request in there. And that kind of counts as a Firewise Day, especially if I get to talk to the homeowner and kind of point out some things they can do. Our brush chipping program goes hand in hand with Firewise. And in 2012, when we started out, we didn't have a seasonal intern crew, so we really relied on the volunteers from within the community. And there's never been a shortage of volunteers, I'll tell you that. They're not only do they do the brush chipping, especially along the roads and around the homes, but they're happy to help load this brush, which, as most of you know, is hard work. The machine's loud, it's hot and dry and dusty, and but we've been, let's knock on wood here, we've been safe and very productive over the years. In 2016, we started getting 3 college students in the forestry program at University of Maine to help load the brush. So that took a little bit of the pressure off getting volunteers to load the brush. The volunteers still did the clearing of the brush and the cutting of the brush, but the loading on the brush chipping day was mostly done by us. And we got Mark Eastman to kind of lean up against that chipper there for a little while and act as our safety officer. He's always there and been very helpful. So in 2016, I think that was the first year we did Moimadeo Road. And that was quite a challenge, very narrow road, as most of you know. And also it's got a little bit of slope to it. So we would be trying to chip up some of this brush on the hill, and there would be people that were coming and going from the beach area and the campground. So in most cases, they're pretty patient, and we just said, we're going to be 5 or 10 minutes, we'll get this done. But that really helps reduce the risk of a fire crossing there, and also as a side benefit, it also provides more visibility to keep drivers and pedestrians safe. This year, we did get 3 summer interns to help load the brush, but by the time we got around to late August, we only had 1. One of them had to go back to school early to quarantine to get ready for his college classes. And then the other one was fortunate to be on a wildfire out west for 2 weeks. So we try to give that opportunity to these seasonal interns so they get experience with large wildland fires. So I called Mark about a week ahead of time. I said, we're going to need some help. And he gathered up the troops, and we had plenty of help that day, probably a little more than we needed. But here you can see us loading a pretty big pile of brush. And I think despite the pandemic and the restrictions and on people coming into Maine from out of state and all that, and people wanting to kind of stay away from crowds, we still chipped about one complete truckload, which is 2.5 tons of brush. So that's a little bit below average, but it certainly qualifies for what we need for the Firewise renewal, which comes up in November. Any questions or comments on that? I think we had 19 forms filled out too, which is a great participant. Because, you know, when you do this, I found with the other Firewise communities, you do this brush chipping day every year. Not everyone has brush to put out. We call it curbside every year. Sometimes they do a big pile and then they're good for a couple of years and they do another big pile. But in this photo, I think this was someone new to the program. I remember talking to them and they had no idea what was going on. So we're glad to have new people involved. And it really helps. Every time you get rid of that brush, you reduce that risk of the fire spreading. So I'm going to transition to current fire activity. As you can imagine, it's been a busy fire year for us, and Maine Forest Rangers investigate and categorize each wildfire in Maine by the type and the cause and the size. So far we've had 1,040 wildland fires, and they burned over 1,005 acres. And that's the highest number of fires we've had since the mid-1990s. It's not the most acreage we've had. We've had a couple thousand acres in the early 2000s from large fires, but it's still quite remarkable how many fires we've had this year, and still going on, the little ones, especially up north. So the interesting statistic that we look at how close these fires occur to structures, and that could be a camp, a cottage, a home, an outbuilding, and nearly 75% of these wildfires either destroy, damage, or threaten nearby structures. So that tells us that we have a lot of this WUI, this wildland urban interface, throughout Maine, and especially in Limington. You're probably also aware of the status of the drought in Maine, and this was a chart from last week that shows most of the state in that severe drought status, and just south of you, the extreme drought. We're hoping that next few days gives us a little relief on that. I'm not quite sure we're going to get a deluge of water, but I think we'll get a little bit of rain. Getting back to the current fire status in Maine, like I said, the forest rangers put a cause on every wildfire that they investigate, and the number one cause, and this is consistent through other years too, it's not just this year, is always escaped debris burns. You can see that out of those 1,000 or so fires we've had, pretty much a third of them have been escaped debris burns. And these are people that most likely have good intentions. They're probably like, I've got this brush in my yard, I need to get rid of it so it doesn't carry a fire. So they get a burn permit, hopefully, and they have a brush pile fire. But they don't always take care of it. And for example, if they don't put it out in the evening and then go off to work the next day, it may just smolder during the morning, and then you get to the afternoon when it's hot and dry and windy, and that fire rekindles, escapes, and causes a wildfire. And that's the same kind of thing that we have with campfires. You can see in the bottom right corner there's a rock ring with a grill on it, and that person or that group had a campfire there and left it unattended, and you can see in the background how it burnt that duff layer, the organic layer of the soil, and then went into the woods and spread. So we really want to make sure that if we're having fires, even after this rain that's expected, that we make sure it's completely out. And the second cause is equipment-caused fires, and then that's the bottom left-hand corner. I've got a picture of a timber harvesting equipment that sometimes they get overheated and clogged up with brush and they catch on fire. And that's probably not a big concern in Limington. I don't know how much logging is going on down there, but it does happen on a smaller scale with brush cutters and even lawnmowers. So during dry periods like we're in right now, a blade from a lawnmower or a brush cutter hits a rock, creates a spark, and sometimes people walk away. They don't even know that a fire has started, and then they come back later, and it's starting to get up into the trees. So we want to be careful with using any kind of equipment outside. So here's some wildfire concerns in your community. I call this volatile vegetation near structures. And as I said before, we really put a lot more emphasis on the softwood trees and shrubs than the hardwoods. They're all combustible and they all will burn, but there's something about the softwoods that have a lot of resins in the bark. And even some of the, I have rhododendron around my house in the Augusta area, and a couple of years ago, I trimmed some of the branches. They were starting to rub up against the siding, and I let them set for a month or two, and then I had a brush pile fire after we had our first snow, which is a good time to wait, by the way. And so I was feeding that fire some brush that I had cut, and when I put that dead rhododendron branches on that fire, you would have thought I was throwing gasoline on it. It just torched right up. So I think that if I hadn't have cut the branches of that rhododendron, it might not be quite so flammable, but I was really surprised how it crackled and just made a little increase in the fire activity. So the second concern is excessive fuel loading. That's near brush and trees, near structures and along roadways. And obviously, there's an increased response time and access to the remote locations and narrow roads. We can talk to the chief after this about response time to the main areas within PLPA, but some of those remote areas like Althea Lane, I think that would take quite a while to get equipment in there. And the last thing is limited water sources for fire suppression. And some people go, we live on a lake. They can just get water from the lake. That's not always possible. Some of the places where you can walk to the lake and go swimming and get in your boat are not feasible for an engine to pull water up and get to a fire. So we'll have a discussion on this in the next slide. Last time we did the brush chipping there, I took a walk down this end of Althea Lane, and they were asking me about the possibility of a dry hydrant being installed there. And I'm no expert in dry hydrants, but I do have I do administer a grant program that would help pay for half the cost of the equipment for dry hydrants. So maybe this would be a good time to have that discussion again about possibility of installing a dry hydrant on this property. So Chief, you were able to take a walk down there this morning?
Yeah, I just barely, but I made it back to the meeting on time.
Well, you saw the one edge is pretty, it's got kind of a steep drop off there. That didn't look too promising to me, but this area going down towards the dock, did that look feasible for you at first glance?
It did. If Mark is willing to do a little bit of work so we can drive closer to the water, I think that would help. I'm a little bit worried if it's by the main part where the camper was, that it would be too much of a draw.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, so where the pipe would come up, it wouldn't. Yeah, if that's 60, 70 feet away, that'd be tough.
Yeah, and it looked like if he's willing to do it, we could make it happen. We could clear a couple of trees and get in there almost right up against the water without interfering too much with his dock. and that would be very feasible.
Yeah. Well, I'm not all that involved in getting permits and stuff like that. So I know that you'd have to talk to the code enforcement officer about how to get started and to get a permit from DEP. But you know, if you are interested in applying for cost assistance on that, we can offer up to $1,500 cost share for the equipment, and I think you could probably get. I think you mentioned you might not need labor costs. Did someone say that someone else has equipment available?
I think Pappy might want to jump in here, but Mark has equipment, good sized equipment, like excavators and stuff like that. Pappy?
Yeah, Mark Ford does have a lot of equipment, dump trucks, as well as he does have a backhoe because he did put in 3 culverts for us this past year. And we also have Mr. Bodge down the street on Corvette Lane, I think, as well. So we've got a couple of guys in the area that have the equipment that would most likely do the work. And you know, Mark, I'll give Mark a call and let him know where we're at. And then, I mean, Mark Eastman and I will have to figure out how and what we need to do, I guess, as well, along with the chief as well.
Yeah, and Chief, I think that I asked for volunteers for the other side of the lake because we definitely do need one off Pequawket Lake Road, I think, which you scouted out a little bit this morning. Some of that, the camps are pretty high above the water, so we'd have to find the right location, and we'd have to find somebody willing to allow the hydrant to come across their property. And you were not on board, but I think it's probably 3 years ago, we had a fire almost to the end of Pequawket Lake Road, and they had a real difficult time getting water to it. So I think we definitely need one on the other side.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough where the buildings are located, and some of the places have a pretty good drop off to get to the lake, and then access getting close to it. It doesn't really affect you guys a whole lot, but a little bit. They're putting in a subdivision on Mike's Way. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And that subdivision is actually going to require them to put in an 18,000-gallon cistern, which is good because currently there is no water supply anywhere in that area, or there's no access to a water supply in that area. So that'll at least give us a head start. So it's better than nothing. But I definitely think if we could do.
There seems to be a dry hydrant though over, but the stream is dry. When you go a little bit toward that the dangerous intersection, if you look to the right, there is a dry hydrant here, but it's got a yellow tape around it, and I'm assuming it's pretty dry at this point.
Yeah, that was actually a cistern that was inappropriately put in, and it doesn't work. There's no water in it, so we're not able to use that, unfortunately.
Now you have a dry hydrant at the end of Whaleback Road, which is quite a ways away, really. Now, when you say Mike's Way, is that the one that's already been started? Is there more developing going on in that area?
Yes.
Okay.
So that will give us some water there.
18,000 gallons?
Yes.
Okay. And where would that be located, Chief?
At the end of where Mike's Way is now, they're going to continue that road and add 7 houses, I think. And right at the beginning of where that new road is, they're going to add the cistern.
Okay. And where is that new road going to go in from Hanscom School Road? Do you know?
It's just going to be a continuance of Mike's Way.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. The other concern with Whaleback right now is there's a pretty significant beaver dam upstream from the hydrant. So we had a woods fire actually out that way that was, I think, about an acre near the potato field, actually at the end of Mike's Way. And we took, I think it was 8 or 10,000 gallons out of Whaleback. And if we needed any more, we probably would have been in trouble because as it is, we had to take the engine out of service and clean the mud out of the pump.
Oh,
So right now, our current situation is I've got 2 hydrants that the beavers have made no good. And due to water levels, we have several more that are not feasible to use right now because the pipes are not even underwater.
Are you allowed to remove the dam?
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out. I think so, but I'm not entirely sure. So before I do that, I'm gonna look into it. Now, if we had an emergency and I needed water, I've told the people to remove the dam. So
Great, thanks.
yeah. Boy, nothing's easy, is it? Well,
no.
no. Anyway, so let's continue on with this. And I'm trying not to push my volunteer fire assistance grant program too much because there's no obligation. If you guys don't feel the need for it, that's fine. But the deadline to apply is November 13th. So after that, I can't really help you until the next year. But if you did get approval on that, you'd know in January whether you got approval for that, and then you'd have until about this time next year to install it. So it still could benefit you if you're interested. I apologize for some of the paperwork. It is a federal grant. It does require some time, but it would be worth it if you're interested to help defray some of the costs. So I'd like to just.
I downloaded that material for the grant program. Haven't had a chance lately to do much with it, but I think I can talk to the chief and maybe we can do something with it. I also see that Greg Moulton has his hand up, Kent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, wait a second. Go ahead,
I
Greg.
just had a dumb question here. Why is it that you cannot take water from the lake to extinguish a fire?
We can. It's the access to the lake that is the biggest problem. Being able to get close enough to draft the water into the pump and make it go where we need it to go.
Okay, so because I know that the big fire a few years ago, I mean that it is a lakefront property, but in that one you were not able to get to the lake. Was that the issue?
I believe so. That was actually before I got hired, but I have been down there since, and I think that if I recall, of course they've reconstructed. I don't know what the original building looked like. I'm assuming it was pretty similar. There was no way to drive around to the lakeside. We have to be probably within 10 or 20 feet of the water source, maybe 30 feet on a good day to actually be able to utilize the water. So if we can't get within that close proximity, it's really hard to utilize the water.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'd like to kind of press on here. It's good to have that discussion. I'd like to do just a little review of some of the training that I've received and we pass on to the communities from the National Fire Protection Association. They have this thing called Defensible Space, and we don't really call it that anymore, but it's the same thing that's illustrated in this graphic. You have this immediate zone within 0 to 5 feet of the structure that you need to spend the most time on clearing combustible items like needles and leaves and branches, stuff like that. And then going out from that, the intermediate zone is 5 feet to 30 feet. You'll still do some clearing there, but not every single tree. We don't want you to live in a parking lot. And then the extended zone is 30 feet to 100 feet, which most people in this community don't have 100 feet that they are working with. But you see the emphasis is clearly near the properties and the structures. Here's a couple of pictures, and these weren't taken in Limington, but I've just got some of these over the years from doing wildfire risk assessments. And you see the picture on the left, they've got well-mowed grass, which is pretty much like asbestos if it's watered and green. And then they've got little stones next to their foundation, preventing any surface fire from igniting that wood cedar shingle siding. So that they probably didn't do that for fire concerns. They probably did that. They didn't want the rain splashing up on the wood and decaying it, but it still works. In contrast, in the picture on the right here, you've got a softwood tree with low hanging branches that if that tree ignited from a surface fire, it would clearly ignite the shingles on the side of that house. And here's another couple pictures. The house on the left is kind of on a hill, and you can see this was taken in the fall, and there's lots of leaf litter there. And if there was a surface fire that got into the leaf litter, it would increase in its intensity as it goes uphill because it preheats as it goes, and it would likely catch that deck on fire and eventually the structure, unless we were able to get some water on it quick. In contrast, this outside seating area, like a deck, is got gravel, and it's just got a few leaves there, but that's a much safer scenario there. You can see the concrete foundation of the house there. It's not really the wood shingles are high enough up that they're not going to ignite even if those leaves get going. One of the organizations that NFPA is tied in with is the Institute of Business and Home Safety, and they have this laboratory down in North Carolina, and they actually created a ember machine, and they did some research on how embers ignite structures, because they would go into these areas, these developments that have had wildland fires go through and take out structures, and they were amazed that it wasn't a wall of flame that took out every single house on one road. It was just every other house or every third or fourth house. And they're like, well, how could this be? And it turns out that when you get these big wildland fires or a big structure fire, they throw a lot of embers up, and then those embers can fly in the air, and the hot air currents from the fire up to a mile. So in this case, they threw some embers at this structure that half of it, the left-hand side, was had the wood siding, and it had mulch down in front of the doorway there, and wood siding up on the dormer where the window is in the second story. And the house on the section on the right had rocks instead of mulch, had ceramic siding, which is fire resistance. And also, so you can see nothing much is happening on the right side. And then here's after they put it out. You can see clearly that the fire started to ignite all on this back side and had gotten up into the roof. I mean, this house was pretty much a goner unless they put it out. But on the right-hand side, it hardly looks touched at all. There's a little bit of singeing there, but it didn't ignite. So that makes a big difference. And we hope that never happens in Limington. Here's a picture from a fire that happened a couple years ago in the I think up near Moosehead Lake. Someone was doing some construction on a new house, and they had some wood scraps in the yard, and a fire started somehow, and the ranger arrived and helped put it out with the fire department. But you can see where that ladder is. There was just enough wood scraps there that it started to ignite the log cabin siding there. And fortunately, they got there in time to put that out. So this kind of thing does happen here in Maine. This picture on the right was something that we staged in Camden a couple years ago. They had a house on top of a hill near a recreation area that was donated to the town, and they wanted to make it a parking area for the hikers. So they worked with the fire department to do a controlled burn, and we heard about it and was able to get some video and still images of the fire. So in this case, it was during the springtime, and we set a couple of bales of hay down and lit those on fire and let them kind of creep up to the house. Well, you can see what happened when it ignited that softwood shrub. It just sent flames up towards that porch and caught that on fire. There's like a little overhanging porch up there. So it didn't take much to get that house going. And then they put it out, and they ended up burning it later in the fall after it had snowed. It was just too dry to let the burn to continue. The picture on the left is was taken down east about 10 years ago, and you can see we do have large fires here in Maine, and that house had a lot of dry grass around it, and I think it survived, but you can see a lot of that smoke. So it's not just out west where we get these fires that can do destruction. Getting back to the home ignition zones, I'll focus in on the intermediate zone now. This is the area 5 to 30 feet. And this picture was taken, I think, also in Booth Bay. And this house looks over the ocean, but there's another house below it. So I think they were clearing some trees for their view, and they just left the brush lying there. And those are hardwood trees that they left there. But if for some reason there was a fire below them downhill at that structure right on the water, that fire would creep up pretty rapidly uphill and catch that brush on fire and some of those softwoods and definitely ignite that home. So that was kind of a scary example there, but they did clean that up eventually. One thing I often talk about when I'm doing wildfire risk assessments is ladder fuels, because when rangers investigate all these wildfires, we also try to categorize the type of fire that occurred, whether it was a crown fire or a surface fire or torching, something like that. And they kind of looked at the numbers, and over 90% of the wildfires in Maine are surface fires. So it's pretty rare that fires in Maine get up into the crowns of trees. It certainly has happened, and we certainly get torching, which is just a single tree igniting. I have some other images that I'm not going to show today, but of the 1947 fire where there was 300-foot high flames that crossed Route 1 in Arundel. So there was no interstate back in 47, but Route 1 was the biggest, widest double-lane highway in the state, and when those white pines got going in the crowns, it jumped that fire line like it was nothing. So if you do have softwoods near your structures and even near the water, you can limb them, even though it's within the shoreland zone. You can't cut them without talking to the code enforcement officer, but you can limb them somewhat. So I like to remind people of that. And also this time of year, you're starting to get leaf drop. You got leaf litter next to some wood here. They've got the lattice work to try to keep the critters out. That's a pretty dangerous situation this time of year. And also on the right-hand side, you've got those cedar shake shingles. So just a simple act of raking some of these leaves up, getting them away from that 0 to 5 foot immediate zone, that really could save your house from a wildfire. We also get leaf litter on roofs. And the one on the left here is typical. You see where there's a kind of a connection on different roof angles. That's where the leaves build up in needles. And it wouldn't take long just to rake those down before winter and get those cleaned up and moved away from the structures. And the picture on the right I like to talk about because this was a log cabin. I think it was out near Rumford, and it had a steel roof, which is obviously the best type of most fire-resistant material you can use for a roof. But they've got pine needles that have built up in that little crook there. And the research shows that if an ember landed in those needles, it would kind of light just the pine needles on fire, and they might drip down onto that softwood, that pine tree, and ignite that pine tree and perhaps ignite under the eaves. So it's kind of, you don't want to be complacent about having a metal roof. They still could allow a fire to ignite the structure. So one thing we look for and talk about when we do wildfire risk assessments is possible ignition sources. On the right here is someone who's cleaning the wood stove ashes out, putting them in a bucket. And what usually happens is all winter long, you throw them in the snowbank and you don't worry too much about it. And then spring comes along and there's no snowbank, so you still throw it. You don't want it in your house. Well, we've had a lot of fires caused by that in the spring. The coals rekindle in the afternoon and start a wildfire. So be careful with that if you burn wood. Left-hand side is a charcoal grill that they're just dumping the ashes on the ground. And obviously a campfire is certainly needs to be attended at all times and completely out before you leave the area. Another ignition source. Now this was a old tower watchman's cabin that we did a controlled burn on years ago. But you know, we talk about hazardous fuels mitigation, that fancy word for clearing your brush. The research shows that structures are actually fuels as well. So I think that's one of your biggest concerns there is if a structure fire gets going with some of those camps and houses that are right on the water that are 30 feet away from each other with vegetation in between, it's likely that that fire could spread. So keep that in mind. And I always say this too when we're chipping, that, you know, we don't really need to worry too much about the larger diameter trees that are near structures. They tend to hold the moisture longer than the smaller diameter trees. So if you're only going to spend 2 hours on clearing brush on your property for our program, or to dispose of it some other way, we strongly recommend you only work with the brush that's smaller than the size of your wrist. That's the size that's going to dry faster after a rain. So just to think about this for a minute, you know, if you're going to have a campfire, you don't start with a big log. You start with a little bit of paper and little small needles and twigs, and then you add on. So that's the same concept there, is that the little stuff dries faster and is more likely to carry a surface fire. Also, I always have to have this disclaimer that our recommendations for clearing brush do not overrule the state or local shoreland zoning laws. So make sure you check with the code enforcement officers. I don't want anyone to say, well, the ranger told me I could cut all these trees right by the water because they threatened my house. We'll both be in trouble. So please keep that in mind. So we're almost done here. We're on the home stretch. Firewise plans for the future. I assume we want to maintain the current status as the Firewise USA site. And Mark knows that we'll be doing the renewal probably in another month or so. They're due in the middle of November. Continue brush chipping days, focus on brush and vegetation near structures. You guys also do a lot of work along the edge of the roads. That's fine. I'd like to continue to conduct random wildfire risk assessments for Firewise Day activities, but I'm also open for other venues. You know, if the fire department's going to have an open house, and once this pandemic is over and we can, you know, have some face-to-face meetings, I'd love to be able to have a booth there and talk to people who are interested about reducing that risk of home ignition. And then we also encourage fire department training within the community. One of our other Firewise communities in in Booth Bay, called Sprucewold, they got the fire department to do a water shuttle exercise just to get an idea how long it would take to get water to a structure that was pretty far into their community. And I think we all know that that's going to take a little bit longer than you would want if it was your house on fire. But I think you guys are headed in the right direction with some considerations about dry hydrants and the cistern that'll go in the new subdivision in Mike's Way. It's all you can do. You got to do a little bit each day and try to get stuff done. Now, before I wrap things up, I wanted to kind of give Mark and everyone in the community a pat on the back, because in 2017 they were awarded a $500 grant for Community Wildfire Preparedness Day, which is put on by the NFPA, and the money comes from State Farm Insurance. So they got the $500 award. There was only 2 given to Maine that year, and they had a great community event where they started everyone off down by the beach area on Mormadeo Road, and had handed out brush cutters and lopping shears and had them trim the brush along that road. And they had a work crew of, I don't know, 8 or 10 people, maybe 12. And they gathered up a lot of brush, and then we came and chipped it later.
We had 23 people.
You had 23, that's right.
23 people that
And
day.
then, right before noontime, they fed them all. You had, what, 2 or 3 grills going, Mark, and
Yeah.
handed out T-shirts. So it really was a good opportunity for the volunteers who do all this hard work to be recognized and also do a lot for their community. And I'll let Mark add any comments.
Yeah, we actually had the local representative from State Farm Insurance and her husband help us with cutting brush and so forth along the roadway.
Oh,
So,
is that her right there with the
Yeah.
red? Yep.
the red and white cap? Yes.
Yep. And then, oh, there she is, right. So that program is still available. I know it was a lot of work for Mark to organize it, and you certainly don't have to do it every year, but keep that in mind that they start looking for applications in January, February, and they try to have a National Wildfire Community Prep Day on May 1st nationwide, but I said that doesn't really work for Maine, so they gave us a month or so leeway to do the work day. But you still have to have a meeting on that day, which is usually not a problem. Any other comments on that? And Mark still has more T-shirts if people need them, right?
The inventory's getting down, however.
Well, good. He's been very generous to give them to our college interns, the seasonal crew.
We may try again this year, 'cause I'm thinking Moimadea Road might need another crack. I'm not sure. I haven't checked it lately, but the last time I was there to get my boat out, it looked like it'd been growing back in.
It doesn't take long. I mean, some people who know forestry in other parts of the country say that, well, you're so blessed in Maine, the trees grow back, you don't even have to plant them. But that does mean, in our case, that we have to do a lot of mitigation to reduce that brush. And I think it would be a good idea maybe to consider going back there, but we'll see how it goes. Well, I wanted to wrap this thing up. We've gone a little bit over 45 minutes here so far, but I think we had some good discussion, and I'll stand by and see if people have any comments or questions. I'm going to turn this PowerPoint off and see if I can see some people here. All right. Let's see. So
I just want to this is Pappy. I just want to thank Mark for all the work he does behind the scenes to get this get our day of chipping set up and getting the volunteers to do the work. So it's you know, without Mark, we probably would not be in the position we're in today. So kudos to Mark for all he does.
yes, I agree. And I think, Mark, you stepped down as president, but you still are helping out with the Firewise program, and that really says a lot about your concern for your community.
We got a great new president, so I'm happy about that.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mark.
Oh, they're on the call, you mean?
Yeah, John
Oh,
Papanico.
yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm the president the last 2 years.
Oh, good, good. Well, I won't keep you guys any longer. I really appreciate your time today. I know we all have busy things going on. It was a good time to do this for me. It sounds like I'm going to be headed out on a wildfire in Colorado for a couple weeks. So I'm going to be part of an engine crew that's probably leaving Friday. The Forest
Good luck to you.
Service. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Well, I'll try to be
Yeah.
safe, and I'll pass on any wisdom I learned, but this will probably be way away from any structures. I think it's probably on the top of a mountain somewhere, but we'll find out. But again, thank you for all your hard work to keep the Firewise program going. And Mark, I'll be in touch with some totals that you'll need on the amount of brush chipping for the Firewise renewal in a couple months. Any closing comments before we call it a day?
Thanks, Kent. Thanks so much for.
Thanks, Kent.
Good
All right,
information.
you're
help,
welcome. All right. You
Thank
guys
you.
have a good day.
You too now. Best
Yeah,
wishes.
thanks.